trust is really foundational to business and leadership. So when we see that someone's actions aren't in line with the words that they say or the values they espouse, we really lose trust for those people. And that undermines, you know, our collaboration, working with them, and bottom line results eventually. So we tend to take character and trust for granted, but it really does matter. And that's why we're here to talk about it. As an example of when things go wrong, when trust is undermined, this research with leader character that I'm going to be sharing with you started following the 2008 financial crisis. So a diverse group of faculty from the Ivy Business School came together to explore what happened that led to the crisis and whether better leadership could have mitigated what had happened. And they found that yes, the 350 senior business leaders that they spoke to in a series of focus groups and one-on-one conversations noted that yes, they thought that better leadership could have prevented what had happened. And when they looked to the failures and successes of what had happened, you know, around the world globally, things played out differently in different countries and in different institutions. They pointed out character and the way that values were turned into actions. So the key insight that they took away was that yes, better leadership would have made things better, and character was implicated. But that's where some of the opinions people held diverged. So some of the leaders were like, yes, character matters, but it's not like we can do anything about that, or you know, how do we talk about character? How do we measure it? How do we define it? And so that was really what started our work with leader character, was trying to understand what leader character is and how we can define it and how we can measure it. So in contrast to character, leaders and practitioners, we're all probably very familiar with competency-based frameworks for leadership development. So we have the language around these, we have really good definitions, and we're very comfortable working with competencies. And again, this is what we often focus on when we think about leadership development. But when it comes to character, we don't have as much specificity or understanding. But the good news was that once the researchers looked into what had been done around character, there was a lot to build on, and there actually is a lot of consensus about what character is. So we set out on a series of research studies. We actually created a model of leader character that sounds like a lot of you are familiar with. And as part of validating that model, we conducted 10 separate studies over a 3-year period with approximately 1,000 leaders and potential leaders. And a definition of character that I'd like to provide you with is a set of virtuous behaviors that work together to form a habit and inform the decisions that you make. These behaviors sustain excellence and well-being at the individual level and at the organizational level. In contrast to people and organizations with strong character, weak character compromises judgment, performance, and well-being. And you can see in the diagram there that character is comprised of traits, values, and virtues. And we do focus on virtues, and the traits and values are also important, and they are expressed as virtues. So the key thing I want you to take away is that leader character is expressed in our behavior. And so that's why we're able to focus on leader character development and treat it like something that we can actually work to change and improve and modify. So this is the leader character framework that was developed based on that research that I mentioned. It builds on prior work going really far back, as far as Aristotle and Plato, who spent a lot of time working with the idea that our behavior turns into habits, and that it's our habits that determines how good we are, how excellent we are. So Aristotle said that excellence is a habit because it's what we repeatedly do. We also found that there were already a lot of work on character more generally. So universal character dimensions had been identified previously, And in some of the research that was done, these were built upon through those conversations with leaders, through looking at research and really thinking about what are the core dimensions of character that matter for performance in organizations. So these are more specific than universal character dimensions that might be at play, throughout our lives and universally. These ones are meant to be leader character specific. You'll note that there are 11 dimensions, and below each dimension, there are several elements below each. And these are meant to be illustrative of that dimension. So someone who is strong on collaboration is likely to be cooperative, collegial, open-minded, flexible, and act in an interconnected way when they're working with others. So again, the idea is that we can observe leader character through people's behavior. And the elements that you see below each dimension aren't exhaustive. So there may be other ways that you can exemplify collaboration or any of these dimensions beyond what's listed here. But these are a really good start, and they're what we often think of when we think about how would someone express any of these dimensions. I'm just going to show you, I want to walk you through some of the, there's a lot going on in that framework. So there's a lot of dimensions and there's a lot of elements. One thing to note that you probably noticed already is that judgment is in the center of what I think of as the leader character wheel. So there's a reason for that. So judgment has its own set of behaviors underpinning it. So if you want to embody judgment and good judgment, you're going to act in a way that is situationally aware, thinking critically, being pragmatic and adaptable. So thinking, that's what we're talking about. Aristotle called this practical wisdom. But judgment is in the center of the framework because it actually relies on all of the other dimensions in order to be expressed appropriately. So what that means is that we use our judgment to recognize when we need to call on any of the other character dimensions. So without judgment, you can't do that. And that's why character is always at play across situations and in the decisions that we make. Judgment is always there. So judgment helps us to see what needs to be done in a given situation. And so you need those supporting dimensions. So for instance, you might be in a high pressure situation and you recognize that you need to call upon your temperance, that ability to self-regulate and be calm in order to enact a good outcome and keep your head about you. So that's an example of how judgment relies on the other dimensions, and that's why they are shown as interconnected. Another key part of the leader character framework and what I think of as the leader character model is that all of the dimensions are only virtuous, so meaning that they're only good for us and good for organizations when they are expressed appropriately. So Aristotle called that the golden mean between two vices, so the one of excess and the other of deficiency. So you can see here for courage, courage, if it is expressed too strongly or, not being balanced by other dimensions, can lead to really reckless behavior. So we think of courage as good, but it's not as simple as just trying to turn it up really high. It needs to be turned up in the right amount, in the right situation, and with those balancers helping to support it. And likewise, if there's a deficiency of courage, you end up with timid or even cowardly behavior. So maybe you're afraid to take the steps that you know you need to take. And so you need to think about what are the other character dimensions that would help me to show up the way I need to show up. And, I've got some suggestions there. So maybe you need justice and accountability to spur you to take that action that you're not looking forward to taking. So this is a really fundamental idea. We do talk about character, and measure the dimensions separately, and that's okay. But when it comes down to it, the real full picture is a little more complicated. And it's actually, I think it's a really cool part of the model. So it's different from competency-based models where, you can have a competency, just by itself and you want it turned up really high to be good at your job. Character is a little different. Another part that follows from that, so based on what I shared about those balancers for courage, and there will be balancers in different situations, in all situations when you're calling upon character, what follows from that is that the dimensions are interconnected. They don't exist in isolation. So again, thinking about any of the dimensions, you can think about what happens when they aren't balanced by the other dimensions. So something that happens a lot of the time is that people are really strong on drive, you know, and again, when we think about business, we think about bottom line results, we think about taking action and getting things done, and that's really important. But if it's not tempered by things like temperance, humanity, things can go wrong because it gets out of balance. So the interconnection is really fundamental and something to keep in mind. Another part that follows from that is that all of the dimensions matter. So again, it's not like a competency system where you can have a set of competencies and then just select the ones that you think matter most for a given role. All of the dimensions matter and they aren't negotiable. So as a leader, for any of us in organizations, we can't just say, well, yeah, this is great, but I don't think I need accountability. I'm just not going to focus on that, or I don't need transcendence. The idea is that they all matter. They're non-negotiable. And if you want to have strong leadership, you need to develop all of them. And again, what we often see happen in organizations is that we do select for people who produce results. So we often end up with people who are high on drive and accountability and integrity. And you shouldn't feel bad about having those qualities, but they often end up not being balanced out by humanity, collaboration, and humility. So, and that can cause some problems. So if you analyze a lot of business problems that end up happening or patterns that you see in businesses where things are going wrong, sometimes or almost always, you can pinpoint what are the dimensions that are out of balance, what are the values that are maybe espoused but not really being given enough weight in the decisions that are made and in the values that are expressed by leadership. So I find that really like a real interesting part of the model and like the whole reason why character matters. I want to also address some common misconceptions about character. So if you are really interested in moving character forward in your organization, you're going to come face to face with some of these misconceptions and you're going to want to be able to address them. So that's what I'm hoping part of this webinar will help you to do. And some of these misconceptions came out obviously in those initial conversations with senior leaders when we were investigating, you know, what character is and what its role was in the financial crisis. So some of the things that senior leaders brought up was that, you know, character, isn't that just something that's separate and not tied to performance? So that's something that we often encounter when we're first working with people, is this idea that character is like a separate piece of the leadership puzzle and not, you know, the whole pie. So it's really not something that you just, you know, put on your character hat when you are encountering a difficult situation. Although that's often when it gets our attention, right? Character, as I've explained, is really central to judgment and decision making. So it pervades all of our decisions. It's always there. Sometimes people think that leader character, because it's leader character, is just for senior executives. And the reality is that we can all enact leader character, and we all should, because it's good for our own performance and our well-being and the performance of our organizations. So it is really for everyone, and it's not just for people that are formally in a leadership position. People think that leader character is really subjective. You know, it's not clear enough to be something we can hold on to and really address and measure. And as I'll show you shortly, leader character has been defined and it can be measured. And then finally, a thing that people think is that leader character is sort of baked in and that it can't be developed. And the truth is that, yes, I mentioned before that character is comprised of traits, values, and virtues. And when it comes to personality traits, when it comes to our values, they do get developed, throughout our lifespan. But we also know that they can change. And if leader character is about the way that we behave, by changing our behavior, we can change our character. So, it is a mix, but it is definitely something that we can work to develop as we're going to explore throughout the webinar. So I want to end with this fundamentals about leader character section by just really reinforcing this idea that character is expressed in our behavior. So character is who you're becoming while you're busy doing. And it's most accurate and helpful to think of character as a set of habits that are either always developing or falling into disuse. So day by day, you're becoming more courageous or less courageous. Day by day, you're becoming more driven, maybe more visionary, and transcendent, or less. So you have to think of character as a muscle that you can engage throughout the day in different ways if you don't want it to fall into disuse. So something that research has shown is that the higher people get into positions of power, the more insulated they get from feedback about their character and, about their performance, because there's different ways they can protect themselves. Nobody likes getting negative feedback. So if you can avoid it, why not? So they get less and less honest feedback. And research shows that sometimes people in positions of power, they become less patient, less compassionate. So they lose some of those good qualities that got them into positions of power in the first place. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that it's not something, it's not a set and forget. It's something that you have to develop on a consistent basis and pay attention to. If you really are interested in really bringing leader character into your organization, into your team, or developing it in yourself, you probably want something that's a little more formalized. So that's why we're going to talk next about how to measure leader character. So the leader character framework that we've been focused on was developed over several years. There was a lot of research that went into it. And once that was done, we developed the leader character insight assessment, and it's available in two forms, but both of them give a measurement of those 11 dimensions of leader character in a behaviorally based way. So there's the LCA Self that some of you might be familiar with, and it allows you to rate yourself on those leadership behaviors that are associated with those 11 dimensions and the elements of character. And it's a really great starting point. We also offer the LCA in a 360 format. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, it means that not only do you rate yourself on those 11 dimensions of leader character, you can select people that are familiar with you, and they are asked to also rate you on those 11 dimensions of leader character. So it can be a really great way to enhance self-awareness and self-development. So there are a lot of benefits with using a standardized assessment that has been validated over several years. So it provides a starting point for development. It provides shared language. So one of the things that came up in discussions with senior leaders was, yeah, character is great. It's really important. Like we believe it's important, but how do we have a conversation about it? So having an assessment like the LCA can help you to have that shared language and develop it through practices like character spotting and the activities that are upcoming that I'm going to share with you. The LCA is behavior-based. So again, that's really critical to working with leader character. So, we all have the best intentions, but sometimes our intentions don't really show up in the impact that we have on people and in our behavior. So it's important to stay focused on how am I actually showing up? And obviously the LCA can help you to reflect on that, and the 360 can help you to get feedback about how other people perceive your behavior and your leader character. There's also a lot of development resources that I'll show you briefly. And if you're curious about how leader character would fit into a development framework, it's not meant to replace competency-based models. So we're not saying that competencies don't matter. Competencies do matter very much, obviously, but we're saying that character also matters, that we should be elevating character alongside competencies to have better leaders. So the LCA can help you to do that. One of the strengths of the LCA and this leader character framework that's been developed is that there is a lot of research surrounding it. So the LCA itself was developed based on a thorough review of the character literature that I mentioned before. So looking through various subjects like philosophy, like psychology, sociology, business, looking at everything and seeing, what should these dimensions of character be? Which ones do we need to include in the model? And then that was validated over several studies. The LCA itself uses a norm sample of 770 leaders. So your results are compared to a high-performing norm sample of business leaders. And we also have follow-up research from thousands of test takers, and that continues to grow. So this is just a little taste of some of the research that has been published using the leader character framework or even using the LCA. In terms of the research that went into the LCA, again, we know that character matters, and we can confidently say that because our research shows that the character dimensions do predict supervisor ratings of leadership performance and derailment. So we had one of the series of studies that we did, we had senior leaders, a mix, take the LCA and receive ratings from their leaders, so supervisor ratings. And the character dimensions do predict supervisor ratings of promotability and derailment. So basically, character really does have a relationship with how ready supervisors feel their people are to ascend into higher level leadership roles. And conversely, the character dimensions also predict the opposite. So if your character isn't as strong, you are seen as less ready to be in positions of higher levels of leadership. So that's why we say that character really does matter. If you aren't familiar with our assessments, we are currently offering a free trial of the LCA Self. You can follow the link here, and I think Helen will be sharing another link in the chat with you. The LCA Self takes 20 minutes to do, and you receive a custom report via email after. And there's a lot of resources that go along with it. So I'm going to show you that in a moment. And so we're getting in now to the part that's really exciting for me, which is how to develop leader character. So I've shown you the leader character framework, gotten you hopefully a little bit familiar for those of you that are less familiar with character spotting and how you can look out for character in behavior. And I've also shared that we do have an assessment and a way to measure leader character, which is really great. But now I'd like to talk about how to develop leader character on a more individual basis. So first, I'd just like to find out whether your company has a formal talent development process in place, and if so, what kinds of development opportunities are offered in your organization. And again, I believe when you're talking about the kinds of development opportunities, you can select more than one. So select as many as apply. Okay, if you've had a chance to respond, thank you for that. Let's see what the results are. So it looks like a mix, but all of you have something in terms of a formal talent development process, which is good. And in terms of what kinds of development opportunities are offered, again, it looks like a real mix, with a lot of you having formal training courses or programs, which is great. And some mentoring and peer support also really important. So yeah, they're all really important. So that's great to see. Whether you have, so it seems like all of you do have something formal. And what's nice about the LCA is that there's a lot that can help to augment talent development processes in various organizations. So along with the LCA assessment, we have published and produced several guides that can help you to work with the LCA and that leader character framework. So there's an administration guide that has a lot of great information about how to use the LCA self. Yeah, I highly recommend you looking at that if you're looking at bringing the LCA into your organization. There's also a lot of resources. So I'm going to show you in a moment some of the resources from the LCA report itself and some additional resources that are freely available on our website. We also offer coaching based on the LCA. So the LCA provides a really great foundation for coaching conversations. And we also offer a certification. So if you are looking to take over the coaching of the LCA in your own organization, that can be a great way to just really get a leg up on the best practices and best uses of the LCA and how to get the most out of it for your team and your people. Just going to quickly show you an example of the types of resources that are available in the report. So there's just so much information. So the LCA doesn't take long for you to take, 20 minutes, but then there's quite a lot of information that you get in the report. If you're wondering how you can get traction with leader character in your organization, so how can you help to convince leaders that leader character matters and that this is something that should be brought into your organization. Information like what I have up here can be really helpful. And again, this is something that you get when you complete the LCA self. So this is the impact of character on organizations. And it's really compelling to show and to think about what does it look like when some of those dimensions are unbalanced or not present. So that's something that you can check out. In the LCA self report and the 360 report, you also get a lot of resources. So each dimension is broken down one by one, and there's resources that you can find at the end of each section. And then on our website, we've also developed a full leader character series that gives more detailed information about how to develop each of the 11 dimensions. So now we're at the favorite part. So thank you for still being here with me. This is the part that really lights me up to talk about, because it's how do we actually, in the midst of our busy lives, try to be better, try to keep working on ourselves so that we can show up for people that the way that we want to. So again, coming back to this idea that character is who you're becoming while you're busy doing, that poses some obstacles, obviously, because most of us are quite busy. So research shows that most of the time when we're going about our day, a good chunk of that time, we are actually quite distracted, right? So our brains are just wired to think about other things. And this is happening quite a bit. So that's an obstacle to showing up the way that you want to, right? So say you're in a meeting and you have the best intentions going in to pay attention and listen and, ask good questions or share what you need to share. But our mind wanders. It's just natural. And then you have all of these other pressures on you, like time pressure, packed schedules, thinking about, family members, thinking about what's for lunch. There's a lot that can go on and just really make it hard to show up the way you want to, even with those best intentions. It can just slip out of focus sometimes. So another barrier to showing up the way that we want to is that most of us don't really know how we show up. So the people who are really self-aware are such a small group of us, unfortunately, and I'm not putting myself in there, but they say that about 85% of us think that we're pretty self-aware, but in fact, only about 15% of us are. 10 to 15%. So those people are so rare that some of us call them unicorns. So self-awareness unicorns, because it is such a hard thing to do. And the reason that it's hard to do is that becoming more self-aware really relies on self-reflection and being really intentional about how you show up. And it also can rely on getting feedback from other people about how we show up. And most of us kind of shy away from that. So if the thought of doing a 360 on your character, you know, if you're like, I don't know if I want to do that, that's how most of us feel. We don't really want to know how we're doing if what we're going to hear isn't good. So self-awareness and a lack of it can be an obstacle to developing our leader character, but you can overcome it in small steps, as I'm going to show you. So we're talking about character development, and you can't talk about character development in our behavior without also keying into talking about habit change. So that's what we're really talking about. If we want to develop our character, we have to act and show up in different ways. So these components are always going to be in any habit change initiative. So self-awareness, self-reflection, and deliberate practice. And it doesn't really matter where you start, but if you start with one of these, you can make some headway into developing your leader character. So I've talked about self-awareness. So self-awareness is really important. And one of the ways you can become more self-aware is to engage in some reflection. So thinking about, how have your past experiences shaped you? How do you want to show up? And who do you want to be? And these are big questions. So it's not something that you're just, going to write on a napkin, although that's totally fine. But engaging in self-reflection is really, really helpful. And research actually shows that people who are able to share a clear narrative about their values and how they were shaped and how their past experiences have shaped them, they're more likely to be able to show up in the way that they want to and to have positive outcomes in their organizations. So, and obviously in their personal relationships. So this is really fundamental and something that you should explore if that sounds appealing to you. And then deliberate practice. So deliberate practice is a very specific term that is meant to be used. It's used by athletes and musicians. So you see examples of that when you look at like really world-class performance. What you're looking at is the culmination of thousands of hours of practice. But we can engage in a little bit of intentional practice, not thousands of hours, and still see some benefits. So the idea is that, though, you need to be intentional and you need to identify, what is it that I need to do that will actually set me up to be doing something differently? What is kind of hard for me but still manageable? So that's what you want to think about. What is something that I can do to show up in a different way, and then deliberately do it? Because again, with our busy lives, it's just so easy to lose track of what you were trying to do. And if this sounds intimidating, the idea, I've talked about, examining these big questions about yourself and thousands of hours of practice, being required to get to a really world-class level. The truth is becoming more and more clear that there's a lot of power in small steps. So we can take small, consistent steps, and that will trump, trying to run a marathon without training for it. So there's a lot of power in what they call sometimes like embarrassingly small steps. So it could look like, working on your humanity. It could look like, trying to smile at people, like just smile when you come into a meeting or ask someone, how their day is going. It can be something that simple that gets the ball rolling to your development. And in that spirit, I want to end the session by sharing a short leader character development exercise called the mindful pause with you. And so this is something that you can do anytime and anywhere. But if you want to just select one time, one part of your day that you want to try it out, that's a really great start. So it's not something that you're literally consciously going to be doing all of the time. That would be too big of a step. But this is something that you can choose a place in your day to try it. So You know, we're coming up on the end of this session. You could think about what is coming up following the session and try this out with that in mind. So this practice was shared with me by Dr. Ryan Nemec of the VIA Institute. So in this practice, you stop and take a few deep breaths. And that itself is really powerful because it often feels like we don't have enough time to just stop and pause and, you know, just take a moment for ourselves. So that is the first step. And then once you've done that, you can ask yourself, what character dimensions does the present moment require of me? So you can do this and think about, you know, what is up next for you, or is there something in your day that's a little more noticeable or noteworthy for you that you want to be able to show up differently? And you can just think about what character dimensions do I want to bring forward in that situation? What do I want to do differently? How am I going to show up? And by doing this practice, you're making it more likely that you're not going to lose sight of how you want to show up. So it's an example of how you can take a really small step towards where you want to go. And again, this is something I hope you'll take away. So Helen is going to share a link with you. It links to our website. There's a little write-up of how the mindful pause works and what its benefits are, and a sheet that you can download and print out that has the leader character framework. So I know some people like to literally have the leader wheel up and they look at it throughout the day. So that's something that you can do. And, you know, change is only possible in the present moment. So it's a powerful tool for working within that present moment to affect change and make outcomes that are better for yourself and the people around you. And with that, thank you for your time. Helen is going to share some questions with me now, I believe. So yeah, thank you for being here with us.
All right. Thank you very much, Ruby. As always, I really enjoy sitting in on your content. It's incredibly practical for both professional and personal life. And that's why we want to take some time for Q&A as well, because you don't always get the chance to talk to a professional like Ruby. We have one question in the chat here that I'd like to start with. As a coach and practitioner of these various psychometric tools, would you say, Ruby, that the ALSEA and character-based learning is complementary to EI training for leaders and self-awareness assessments?
That's a great question. Yeah, so by EI, I'm assuming they mean, yeah, emotional intelligence assessments. Yeah, yes, I haven't thought about that consciously, but yes, emotional intelligence is definitely one of the things. So temperance is one of those leader character dimensions in the framework. And that's something that a lot of people feel that they need to do better with, right? We all feel like we could do a better job controlling ourselves in different situations. And that's something that is a part of emotional intelligence as well, right? Regulating our responses. So I do think they're very complementary, and the work that you're doing, if you're embarking on that, yeah, sounds really interesting.
All right. And like we said earlier, if there's any conversation in the Q&A or things from the webinar that you want to follow up on, you're welcome to send Ruby an email. Another question for you, Ruby, what are some examples of character development activities that people could do with their employees or on their own?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some of the stuff that we've developed, you can find on our website. So one thing that I didn't mention is we've developed a character calendar challenge. So there's actually, you can pick a dimension that you want to focus on with your group and work on together identifying some things that you want to do. So we have these character calendars, and they have some ideas for small ways that you can use those. Yeah, I think you could also, like I said, yeah, pick a dimension that you all agree is something that you want to focus on as a team or individually, and just identify some small ways that you can work on that dimension. So yeah, there's so many ways that you can go. One of the resources we also have on the website is a team building guide. So it shares a way using the LCS self-assessment. So you could take the LCS self and then reflect on your results, and the team building guide has some questions that you can do with a small group that might be helpful for you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm going to ask one more question. And again, like we said, please email us if you have more that come up. This is a great one. Ruby, can you recommend how neuroscience or neuroleadership, things like SCARF model, threat and reward, might be complementary to the leader character model that you shared today?
Ooh, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so how I think of it is, I'm less familiar with I don't know that there's the neuroscience of leader character, but what I do know is that all of us are fairly sensitive to a sense of threat, right? So I started by talking about trust and what happens when we don't trust people, right? We pull inwards. We don't show as much of ourselves. We are less vulnerable, right? We're not going to put ourselves out there in an environment where we're not safe. So if this is sort of in line with what you're saying, I think that we are able to show up at our best when we feel safe. And it's when we feel safe and secure and are supported that we can really bring all of those character strengths out.
Thank you. All right,
Yeah,
really quickly.
great questions.
Yeah. Okay, really quickly before you guys go, for those of you who are here to get professional development credits for SHRM or ATD, I'm going to need to know who you are so that I can send you a certificate, particularly for SHRM. So you don't have to answer no here. I just couldn't make a single yes option. So please let me know if you do want to get a professional development credit for attending this webinar, and I will email you that certificate later today. If you liked what you saw here today, we do have other webinars. We're running them monthly this year. So you can take a look at the calendar on our website. I'll put the link in the chat there for you. We have a couple other leader character ones, and we have a range of other ones regarding succession planning, other leadership skills assessments as well. So feel free to take a look at those. And then when you leave the webinar, you will be given access to a feedback survey. We do take into account all the feedback that we get. So if you have ideas for things that you'd like to see in the future, things that can be done better, feedback on just things that went well, we would love to hear that as well. So if you could take a minute to fill that out, we would very much appreciate it. And we're always here. Ruby's happy to answer more questions via email. And for now, I think that is everything we have for today. Thank you everyone very much for coming. We hope this was helpful, and we look forward to seeing you at one of our future webinars soon.